Hi everyone, I'm Jeanne Gang and I'm an architect and I live in Chicago. A lot of people know me for the Aqua Tower, which is right outside the window, a building I designed a few years ago. But right now we're inside the St. Regis, which is another tall building that's under construction right now that I'm working on. I'm really interested in both tall buildings and also neighborhoods at the same time, these different scales that coexist in Chicago. If you look outside this window, you can see how the scale drops off very quickly to the south, and it also does that to the west as well. Chicago is historically, unfortunately, a city that is very divided by race and by wealth. And so one of the things I'm really interested in is working in those neighborhoods, activating the neighborhoods, helping to make them vibrant for people of all levels of economic income. But also, I'm interested in tall buildings because of the way that they bring people together in a smaller footprint, and it's also, reduces the carbon when people can live in a smaller place, walk to work, walk to cultural destinations. Chicago is a very flat place, so the more dense we can make it and the taller we can make it. We don't have mountains here, so the skyline is kind of our mountain range. So I'm really excited to show this building that I'm working on right now and some of the things that it does to work on the scales of the city. So we're going to go into the other side of the tower and look to the north now. My belief in architecture is really that it's about creating relationships between people, but also between us and our environment. It really sets up the space for those relationships to unfold. And so with architecture and the scale of the city, like a city like Chicago that's so, many people live here, but it's also could spread out really far and flatly. Tall buildings are one way that you can kind of create a vertical neighborhood where people living in this building can be, part of the community in their building, but also part of the city at the same time. A city is really just, it's a collective, and we all need to think really carefully about climate change and what we can do to improve our environment. One of the things is living in a more densely arranged pattern, which reduces our energy use. But I also think that our communities can work together to also reduce the negative impacts of cities. One of the things I'm really interested in is the other living creatures that interact with buildings, especially tall buildings, like birds, for example. In cities on waterways, one of the problems there is here is that you have a lot of collisions with the glass on buildings from migratory birds. So in Chicago, birds fly all the way from South America through to Canada on these migratory flyways. And they can be hurt and negatively impact in big numbers, like 1 billion birds a year die from crashes with window glass. And that makes architecture one of the biggest killers of birds, glass architecture. So I'm really interested in ameliorating this challenge, and been studying with ornithologists and experts in glass production how to reduce the negative impacts of buildings on our environment. We have a responsibility to make sure that our cities are safe, not just for people, but also for the environment as a whole. And that means, reducing carbon, reducing energy use, but also thinking about our avian, creatures that interact with birds. And one more thing is that besides just having glass and steel in the city, it's really important to invite biodiversity into the cities. And so with the tall buildings that I've been working on, I've also, in addition to thinking about the glass and how it interacts with birds, it's also about introducing more spaces for wildlife habitat to inhabit, like on rooftops, for example, and making pervious pavement around the building and habitats around the building so that animals, insects can use the city in a productive way. Wow, so now we came from the vertical city and we're here in Lincoln Park Zoo. It's a nature boardwalk that I designed, and it's an incredible, it's a kind of a radical new way to think about nature in the city. When it was built first in 1908, it was really part of this idea where nature is picturesque, a version of nature, but not really a functioning version of nature. So what we've done here is totally revive this space and turn it into a place where there's a lot of biodiversity. And like I said, I think it's really closing the distance between humans that occupy cities and the rest of this much more rich, biodiverse nature that exists all around us. So we planted lots of different native species of plants that attracted animals. And now here at the zoo, there's an urban wildlife institute that studies urban wildlife, and we have now over 250 different species have been counted here in this place. But it's not only about the wildlife, it's also a place that people can come. And so it really is a place where architecture draws people in. We designed the pavilion, and this place was finished around 2010. But so now it's really grown in, and the pavilion has become a real beloved place for people to gather. So it's really bringing, people, the residents of Chicago, together close to this more wild version of nature, and really closing that distance. The pavilion is made of wood. It's wood lamellas that were prefabricated and brought to the site, and we just created this one little space, and it's so magnetic. People come here for classes, they come here for weddings and wedding photos, and it's really compelling. So I love the combination of architecture and then this kind of biodiverse nature right in the middle of the city that brings these two things together. The problem is now, today, we're in this serious emergency. It's like a climate emergency on the one hand, and then the social inequity on the other. And it's something that has to be addressed so quickly because there's not a lot of time. So what I think we're talking about tonight is really about closing the gap between people and the city, but also closing the gap between people and nature. It's about creating these relationships between those two parts, setting up a place where people can develop understanding of each other. I think it's a place like this really starts to give a resiliency to our cities, and I think it's really important to think differently about nature in the city. When I think about designers, I think we've always been trained to just, design buildings, or for a landscape architect, design a landscape piece by piece, and it can't be that way anymore. It really has to be about starting to expand our idea of what practice is, and to think about how we can, change things. And it means thinking about how they're related to each other, and not being afraid to advocate for something. And I think that's the future of what we need to do for the design field, is if we're going to solve some of these really difficult problems, we're going to have to expand how we think about the way we work. I think tonight is about ideas, and the ideas are really about creating stronger more resilient relationships between the natural world and all of us that inhabit it.